This is An Infinite Path, spoken word essays by Niles Heckman, some of which go on to become our documentary short subject films, half of which release freely here through the podcast, all of which can be found through your support at nilesheckman.com. We oftentimes use the two terms in our writing, the bottom up and the top down. In this essay, we will attempt to go more into specifics of what these two phrases mean and why they are so important for system balance. Also, why within man-made socioeconomic systems, which are hierarchical, our cosmology advises heading in one direction, the bottom up over the top down, because that hierarchy is a pyramid structure. In terms of hierarchy, being the arrangement in which items are represented and positioned as inferior or superior in terms of size of influence. Hierarchies come in many different forms, both occurring naturally in nature and within artificial man-made systems. In the plant kingdom, for example, there is very much hierarchy in fractal patterns, such as leaves or branches, where a primary stem then extends out into smaller substems. For example, if a tree has one main trunk that is 100 branches, one of those branches cut won't kill all the other branches. But cutting the one trunk will kill the whole tree. So rather than having an entire forest consisting of only one tree with one trunk with every single branch in the entire forest stemming off that one trunk, nature knows to instead have many different trees with many different trunks, supporting many more various different branches in a more decentralized way. So that if one tree is lost, then there are still many more sub-hierarchies of individual trees. Thus, there are nested hierarchies within hierarchies. In nature, within pack animals, there is a hierarchy of influence. In the animal kingdom, in primates or elephants, for example, there is the matriarch or patriarch, and their control and influence extends down into the younger adults and then down into the offspring. Within human indigenous cultures, this had been similar for eons, in small tribes, with leaders or councils of wise elders. But all those things directly knew each other. Once direct individual-to-individual barter ceased to become the primary form of exchange, and money came to be a thing because of the advent of agriculture and thus population size, socioeconomics arose, said to be the study of the interrelation between economics and social behavior. Things started going weird when the population grew large enough that many people started to not know who each other were. Then authoritarian figures like kings and queens arose who began colonialization and parasiting the resources of the animal kingdom and the people of the land. And due to having become the top of the socioeconomic hierarchy, the pyramid capstone began to impose centralized authority over others. This was the first advent of the few controlling the many. A rare new negative for humanity which had lived more in decentralized hierarchical harmony for its prior existence. If you had an honorable philosopher king or queen who truly loved their people, it barely worked. But when the king or queen was a deplorable, like in Game of Thrones, like the vast majority of kings and queens were through time, you now had a system resulting in overarching corrupt control led by few that had its talons over many larger groups of individuals, now existing over what was then to become the imperial kingdom of control, over many villagers and their later towns and later small city centers. That, rather than having each tribe or village continue to have their own small sub-hierarchy of rules. After the Second World War, the world split into two major geopolitical blocs and spheres of influence with conflicting political views about government and society. The Western First World and the Eastern Second World each made up a mix of government and corporate influence, all based around money and finance. The remaining 3/4 of the world population, countries that did not belong to either bloc, were considered the Third World. The term Fourth World was then coined referring to widely unknown nations of indigenous peoples, First Nations, living within or across national state boundaries. So hierarchy had then gone really extreme in the First and Second World and stayed more balanced in the Third and Fourth World. In the First and Second Worlds, whenever a system has socioeconomics and politics, there will then be opposition opinions and attitudes. To identify the fundamental differences between political poles, we have left and right, which, unlike so-called polarization of politics, are not a black and white binary. For when one is extreme on either end of left or right, following the dogma and doctrine of that extreme. Equilibrium lies in the middle gray area between black and white, where individuals should not call themselves solely of the right or solely of the left, but recognize that they have aspects of each and may lean one way more than the other, or else have some perfect balance between the two. These two are not about individual versus collective, for there can be extreme collectivism and thus dogmatism on the extremes of both sides. Instead, these two poles of political philosophy are mostly about hierarchy. For the modern left-leaning liberal speaks on behalf of the bottom of the hierarchy, while the modern right-leaning conservative speaks on behalf of the top of the hierarchy. So the conservative leaner will typically see societal problems with those at their lesser socioeconomic level, and the liberal leaner will typically see societal problems with those at their higher socioeconomic level. The difference in ideologies should just be about finding balance points regarding system distribution and hierarchical scale, which is more egalitarian. Not about one way being exclusively better than the other and catering to only one side of a spectrum, which then leans authoritarian, as is seen in something like more extreme versions of left-wing ideology, which is communism, or more extreme versions of right-wing ideology, which is fascism. Neither of which you want anything to do with, for it's either the gulag or the camps for any individual who thinks for themselves. So if we look at any major system in the two modern worlds, which has to do with socioeconomics regardless of political leaning, we can see that when scaled too large, it becomes more and more corrupt. And when scaled down, corruption is mitigated. For balance of hierarchy is crucial for a system being kept in equilibrium and thus resiliency. And we want some hierarchy, but without extreme hierarchy. Instead, a level of balanced hierarchy with value amicably distributed. In the modern world, we'll give examples of various systems and how they work better when smaller, which really just means decentralized, versus larger, which really just means centralized, regardless of political ideology. This is also why we don't rest the problems with just one of these systems, like saying government only is the problem, or corporations only are the problem, or science only is the problem, or religion only is the problem. But realize there's both good and bad in each. Good more on the decentralized side, for when inevitable corruption or decay hits with any of these systems, it does not distribute so broadly, but instead it's more localized. So here's a very brief deconstruction of how these four major systems all have both good and bad. But the larger they become in modernity, the more they are all only and exclusively really all about maintaining wealth and thus power and control. For we must realize that since the creation of centralized monetary systems, the world has not ever behaved as we are told. Firstly, we have big governments, which are centralized governmental power entailing small groups of individuals who should be elected by the people, yes, but regardless of being elected, end up being able to control aspects of their entire country's populations through policymaking, oftentimes being so removed from their constituents' direct lives and hardships, tending to then care more about supporting and financing special interest power than they do their populations, which in oppressive countries is very overt and obvious, and in more supposedly democratic societies still occurs just in more covert ways. With, yes, the power to force taxation and its will upon small states, municipalities, and citizenry. Compare that to smaller, more local community governments, where you instead can know your local community governance, its local representatives, and can be more directly involved in the political process in regards to where local tax revenue is going, funding your local schools, public works, infrastructure, etc., and having much more opportunity to be truly represented at a local level. Now, to not sound like just a right-winger that only criticizes big government and gives a pass to big corporations, let's look at big corporate power, which are those special interests with teams of lobbyists in Washington that have so much consolidated power that they put their large revenues into political policy, having created blanket consumerist commercial culture whose primary care is maximizing quarterly profits and not the well-being of their employees or customers, who have interlocking boards of directors who demand endless financial growth on a planet of finite material resources, privatizing gains and socializing losses done at the public purse, and very well know that the name of the game is to divide and conquer by keeping the working class infighting. For if you think a giant tech company or government contractor are your friends, think again. whose sole owner or boards of directors or top executives are so rich that they have so much power over so many employees that they can easily fire 10,000 workers overnight and move the mega factory offshore for cheaper labor, or even buy entire small nations. The metaphor we use is that instead of one mega hardware store chain that hires 10,000 employees with one CEO and one board of directors, better to have 500 of those potential employees create hundreds of small business local hardware stores, each which would have those 10,000 people that they would hire have more healthy competition, embody more ethical behavior, and distribute proceeds from those businesses more amicably across the socioeconomic spectrum to the individualized workers, rather than funnel it upward to just the top of the pyramid in a parasitic way. Because many smaller and medium businesses have many more people in the pool in control and steering the ship of the business, while one megacorp has just one board of directors who call all the shots, which might be just a dozen people. Mass corporations also turn out mass blandness, where now in the United States, which has suffered from decades of conservative policies which only help the top of the hierarchy, have resulted in company merger after company merger. So when you now drive across the US, each shopping center has the same monotone corporate blandness, repeated over and over. So compare that to smaller businesses, such as the local shop in your town, which has encouraged bottom-up business growth of interesting, more creative and original small shops, each containing more original content, in which you can know the business owner directly and they may know you, so they actually might care about you and your family and create products that aid in your well-being, such as the farmer's market stand owner or any other form of in-person or online cottage industry crafter, who make their products locally, usually by hand, so they're extremely well crafted and of higher quality. And the employees have more say in how the business is structured in the long run, unlike the giant corporation which turns its employees into mindless cogs in assembly lines. This is why creative, optimistic people tend to be drawn to entrepreneurship, if not working entirely for themselves. Now, we acknowledge that small local governance is not necessarily going to be able to manage national healthcare systems, or a small business is not able to build commercial airliners or mega engineering projects like bridges, or mass-produce electric vehicles, etc. So some governmental and corporate scale-up is necessary. This is where we may go from small to medium. But equilibrium is to be found so that one federal or private entity can't metastasize to such extreme size that it monopolizes power over any and all other aspects of the system. For healthy competition truly is the way. This is why, during chunks of specific periods of time, such as perhaps every 25 years, it might be a logical idea to have every governmental body or corporate entity be required to split into smaller competing parts. The United States, for example, has had past policies of trust-busting monopolies with great success. So again, regardless of political leaning left or right, which this is not about, it's about top-down or bottom-up. Perhaps it's time to break up left-leaning big tech or right-leaning big ag or big fossil fuel. Now, to be fair and not sound exclusively like a left-winger, we have big science, which is also intertwined in the realm of big academics and universities, which have some good things, yes, but if we're really honest, we must admit that they have morphed into being institutions of high cost and low value, whose goals are to tell people more what to think instead of how to think, and are more concerned with making money through admissions and keeping their tenures rather than really searching for biological, historical, or epidemiological facts and truths. The Ivy League schools in the US, along with Stanford, for example, are sitting on billions of financial surplus and could easily lower their admission fees, but year after year, surprise, surprise, those fees go up and up because they are financial profiteering institutions first, then schooling and scientific organizations as a distant second. Big science has brought us many advancements in medicine and technology, but has had negative things as well, such as creating more and more efficient weapons of war and mind control, gets consciousness totally wrong, and can be equally dogmatic in its views as religion, and thus only truly advances one funeral at a time. Now compare that to small science, which is true science of the independent researcher or small team of discoverers, who may not be credentialed but are truly more open to open-ended discussion, take off the beaten path exploration, think for themselves, truly respect the scientific method, and open-mindedly follow the data, no matter how outside the box it leads. This is no more perfectly seen than with Egyptologists, the official academic version of which don't care or try to find true details and history and mystery of that ancient culture, but instead how to fit it into their preconceived dogmatic timelines. That versus independent, truly scientific researchers such as R.A. Schwaller-De Lubbock's and John Anthony West and more, who looked at ancient cultures from a higher consciousness, third eye perspective. This is also why much of the scientific world expects you to have credentials, so it looks like you're a professional, but in reality, because then they know you've gone through their thinking inside the box, not rocking the boat conformist schooling structure. It's also why ancient, more esoteric practices, such as forms of holistic health, or astrology, or alchemy, are said by larger academic officialdom to be pseudoscience when they actually more respect and follow scientific methods. Then we have fake spirituality, which is big religion. The only difference between a cult and a religion is the number of its subscribers. Larger exoteric outer religion is a construct made by man to reduce larger spiritual concepts into prepackaged menu sets of literalized black and white moral doctrine to sell wholesale, with dogmatic convictions which are the hill you're pre-programmed to die on. Claim their hierarchy is needed for you to get to the divine via the disempowerment and imbalance of the divine feminine. Misinterpretation of text as literal historical documents that rewrite our origins in history. Also telling people what to think instead of how to think. Asking each follower to outsource their power to a big G god of guilt and heaven and hell, and the money. Oh my goodness, the money. Televangelist preachers who, man, do they want you to send in your money. We were at a mega church in Alabama for a wedding, which was at one of the small side chapels next to the main facility, which literally looked like a shopping mall. That is not a spiritual entity. That is a corporate commercial entity. Big religion megachurches in the United States are so corporatized that on job posting websites, you will now occasionally see openings for church-related jobs, just like at a company. And in alternate New Age spirituality, gurus who also amount massive followers are not much different, being solely about the money. Then we have small spirituality or more esoteric religion, which is more spirituality about the individual and their magical relationship to nature, acknowledging holy works are of mythological, astrotheological, and allegorical origin, which is to do with each person being a direct conduit to the divine through the esoteric cores of all faiths. Acknowledging small g God or henosis or higher essence of source or divine, whatever name it's been called by uncountable cultures through time. Esoteric spiritual practices are about introspective, personal, direct experience and initiation into higher states of consciousness, which then cannot be outsourced or made to profit from. This essay could really expand into a whole book. Perhaps it will someday. For this deconstruction of the big can continue to all branches of all artificial systems, such as big technological, financial, medicinal, etc., compared to their smaller, more decentralized equivalents. And a reminder, small doesn't mean scale purely in terms of size. It more means the power is more well distributed amongst individuals at the bottom to mid levels of the pyramid, with each having more power. So it's really a lesson in decentralization versus centralization. Now, we are not naive in the sense of thinking this will happen, for it is happening, quickly. It's taken many lifetimes to centralize, and it will likely take just as long to continue to decentralize. But decentralization of the big, we must. For what this really comes down to is the size of many millions of us individuals. Are we well-educated, conscious, truly honorable, and resilient human beings who live more in harmony with our natural environment? Then if we are, being big in heart and mind, and then truly more individualized, that means we are big individuals. For only small individuals need big systems.